And it can build up and be kind of heavy. Now, if you want to use that for an artistic, you know, something very artistic, that's another story. But for me, I thought it was too heavy of a buildup, and we needed to change that. Now, I'm going to back up the bus a little bit and give you a little bit of a tip or a little bit of a hint. And I didn't do it on this one, but it was Crystal Smythe came up with this. I'm giving her full credit for this, and it made me mad. I didn't think of it sooner, but she thought that if before we add our pattern in, or right when we're adding our pantographs in, if we split the pantograph, put splits in it, it would help with our jump stitches going across. Then what would happen is it would just go up and around and back. I have not, in theory, it sounds like it's going to work, but I have not played around with that. So I'm just putting that out there. If you're first doing this, I don't want you to get confused on what I'm saying. Just, you know, follow this video. That was a little sidetrack that if you really understand what we're doing here, you may get to thinking, yeah, that might work. So I haven't tried that, and, you know, I just put that out there. So let's get back to figuring out what we want to do with these patterns, these broken patterns, because right now they're not clean. On the edges, they're all clean, but going along this outside block, we're going to have some issues. So I'm going to change this to, it's at continuous now, and at continuous, of course, it has no jump stitches. I'm going to put this at not just jump stitch. I actually want to tie off, because, I mean, if I was real meticulous, I'm going to leave it at jump stitches now. But if I was real meticulous, if this was a show quilt or something, and I really wanted to make sure that I got close to this wreath, what I might do is use the tie off. So doing this, you've got your choice between continuous, jump stitch, or tie off. Tie off, it'll stop, and you're able to manually put in a few stitches to close it in. For this demonstration, we're just going to use jump stitch. Now, you have to wait. It sort of calculates how many jump stitches. Right now, I don't have that many. Believe it or not, 9 jump stitches is not that many. Sometimes you could do this, especially if you're not using this type of a pattern and you're going back and forth on little shallow rows. Many times you could have you could 144 jump stitches up to 200, whatever. That just is our objective here is to try to get as few jump stitches as we can without a lot of heavy stitching of it going back and forth. I was playing around earlier, and it's left at this. I was doing 1.5 inches, and for me to check this 1.5 inches, I will zoom in on this. And this isn't a real good check, but if you can see on certain areas, I'm going to zoom my camera up a little bit more. I hope I remember to take it back down, but I'm panning around here. And let me pan around here. And see how right here it's a thin line. And then right over here it's kind of thicker. It goes kind of thicker. I don't know how many times that's going to go back and forth on that line. But I do know, because I've got it set for 1.5 inches, that's going to be, I think that's going to go back and forth a few times. But, you know, you have to kind of weigh this all out. If you're using a very thin thread like Bottom Line or RFL 60 weight, or let's see another one, So Fine, some of those really fine threads, and if you blend it real well with your fabric, you're probably going to be better off going back and forth in little sections. I still don't think you're going to get as much of a build-up as you would with continuous, but you'd get little sections of build-up. So, you know, that's kind of something you're just going to have to weigh out what's in, you know, the quilt, what works for what. If I changed this, I'm going to change, let me zoom back out so you know where I'm at. Oops. If I change this down to 1/2 inch, 0.5, I want to show you what happens. It takes a little bit for it to calculate. It was at 9. Now it puts in 26 jump stitches, and I can look at this, all these green little things going across, and you know, you can look at it. Those are all the jump stitches. So if I was being very meticulous with this and I didn't want a lot of heavy buildup with thread, or if I was using a thicker thread, the lower you have the threshold, the more jump stitches you're going to get. The larger you have the threshold, the more back stitching you're going to get. So that's completely up to you, however many you want to have. I'm going to change mine back up to 0.15. That would be 1.5 inches. And, you know, if I were to put a real fine thread in there, I think I would be okay at it. But here again, I don't want to tell you, you know, everybody's standards are different. So I'm going to accept that. And it's pretty much done now. I would just hit finish and it would be ready to sew. And I'm not going to take the time to sew this right now, but I want to show you the sequence that I would probably sew it first. I would, if this were me, and I realized we have a lot of smart owners out there, and everybody comes up. It was wonderful at the show because we were all brainstorming, and well, I wasn't actually. I just watched all the owners kind of brainstorming how they would do this. And if it were and I don't really know what they were talking about as far as the best way to quilt this pattern, but if it were mine, and I have sampled some of these, I don't want to stitch it right now because it's going to take some time, but what I would do is actually start with my background. I would sew my background first, and then I would realign the center of, then I would realign the centers. I would mark my center on my block, on my physical block, on my quilt. Then what I would do is make sure that my background is centered on the block, which it should be, especially if I had marked on quilt to set that block pattern up. And then I'd go back and sew the pattern, realign it to the center, because when you're sewing a lot of detail, your fabric's going to shift, everything's going to shift. So that's why I would like to get that done first. I would like to do that first and then sew the pattern. Now we have the option here also to make, remember that contour block? It's actually still a block pattern. So what I could do is change this so that it stitches. If I want that outline, if I do want that little gap to show, I can stitch an outline to that. And I'm going to add pattern. I'm going to add a pattern. Oops, let me get out of that. See, I make mistakes too. I'm trying to find, yeah, okay, let me go back. This is where we were. If I want to make this a pattern, the block, I'm going to add a block. It's in the add a block edit. We're editing that block. Now it makes sense. We're editing that block, and I'm going to convert it into a pattern. Now see, this shows me that it's a block. Do you see what it's a block right here? I'm going to change, I could punch that, and it turns red, if you can see it. It turns red, and then I could make that into a pattern. Then I would stitch that pattern after all the fill is stitched, especially if I had a lot of jump stitches, or tie-offs, because then that would sort of, you know, that would cover some of that stuff off if it landed right. Here again, you're going to have to really be a little bit careful on where you put these things to make sure that they are all lined up when you go to stitch them. So that's the only thing about doing these kind of blocks. You have to, you know, you have to put some fudge room in. You have to just remember that pattern, you know, fabric tensions, batting, the tightness of your thread, everything plays into this. So I don't want you to get the impression that you can just plop one of these things on your quilt with ease. It does take a little forethought, and the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. But I would practice on scrap fabric first before I would go and you know, put this on a real quilt. I am not going to make this into a pattern just yet because I have something else to show you, and that will be on the next video.